Discover the incredible moment a badge became a target, one woman's touching fight for justice. Emma Carson had always known the warmth of her quaint Midwest town, where family values blossomed in the summer sun, laughter echoed in the park, and police officers were deemed the last line of defense against disorder. To her children, she was a hero in scrubs, pouring the love she had into her work as a nurse. But as she clocked out of her shift one fateful evening, adrenaline still coursing through her veins, she stumbled upon a scene that would turn her entire world upside down. The sun was high, illuminating the robust trees that cradled the park's edge. Emma moved to the street corner, ready to cross, when the bustling life around her momentarily faded into silence. She froze as she saw it. A young black man being forcefully pinned to the ground by 3 officers, his cries torn between the shouts of the onlookers who had begun to gather. There was nothing heroic about the way the badge seemed to overrule humanity, and Emma's heart raced with confusion. How could this be happening here, in a community she believed was safe? The stories of her father, a retired officer, played like a film reel in her mind. The tales of upholding justice, of protecting the innocent. They had painted the badge in a heroic light, but the vibrant colors that once filled her perception began to bleed into shades of gray. She stood, trembling not just from the shock, but from the haunting realization that she had never before questioned the righteousness of those who wore the uniform. Why had she turned a blind eye? What was missing in her understanding of justice? As she wrestled with her thoughts, anger and guilt wrestled within her chest with debilitating intensity. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Her decision now felt monumental. In her heart, she knew something was amiss, but the implications of uncovering the truth twisted her stomach into knots. Would she tarnish her father's legacy? Would she risk her children's safety by swimming against the stream of complacency that enveloped her community? Emma felt paralyzed, her emotional armor cracking under the weight of her newfound awareness. The very officers who were supposed to protect her were unearthing a cold reality. As days turned into nights, she found herself sitting in her living room, poring over articles, statistics, and testimonies. Overwhelmed with dread, she grasped her phone to reach out to a brave ally, a local attorney named Marcus, well versed in the depths of injustice embedded in their world. But in doing so, would she be seen as a traitor by her friends, those she grew up with, many of whom had donned the badge themselves? The external world slipped into a blur as internal anxiety thrummed through her. Emma questioned her resolve again and again. Was it worth it? And yet the fire for justice beckoned her to move forward. The fear tightened like a noose around her heart when she discovered evidence available only through reluctant informants. Just when she felt close to uncovering something significant, an anonymous message sent chills cascading down her spine, a warning that not only threatened her, but her family, urging her to back off. Faced with this ultimatum, she felt the stark division within herself. The desire to persevere against a broken system battled her fear of losing everything she cherished. With her pulse racing and breath hitching, Emma found herself standing on the precipice of a decision that would reshape her world. Each beat of her heart echoed a profound inquiry. What was justice worth if it could cost her everything? The questions loomed large, pulling her deeper into a shadowy maze of conflict that promised nothing but uncertainty. Emma sat in the dim light of her living room, the clutter of papers strewn across the coffee table, a stark reminder of the precarious line she was balancing on. Each article she had read felt like another weight added to her already burdened shoulders. The stories of injustice painted a grim picture, each statistic a piercing reminder that complicity breeds silence. It wasn't just the young man she had witnessed that day, it extended far beyond him, revealing a systemic failure that had gone unchecked for too long. The words of Marcus echoed in her mind, urging her to confront the truth head-on. He had spoken with passion about the necessity of dismantling the culture of silence surrounding law enforcement. Yet his pointed advice resonated like a distant drumbeat, a rhythm she wasn't sure she could match. It felt easy enough in theory, yet reality was far more complex. As a nurse, she was trained to save lives, to mend wounds, and to provide care, but confronting the institutional power that churned beneath her well-crafted facade was an entirely different beast. Her instinct to protect her children battled against the drive for justice that had ignited in her heart. What kind of strength did it take to challenge the very foundation of trust she had once upheld without question? Suddenly, the feeling of being a hero seemed far out of reach. The shadow of her father loomed larger still, the retired officer who had once worn the badge with pride, now an emblem of everything she was beginning to question. Late one night, when the weight of indecision had become unbearable, Emma made a choice that rattled her to the core. A message flew from her fingertips to Marcus, the single click of send, stirring something deep within, an act that could no longer be undone. She would meet him tomorrow. The next morning, she awoke with crimson ribbons of anxiety dancing in her stomach. As she got ready, the motions of brushing her hair and buttoning her blouse both calming and unease-inducing, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. There was resolve behind her eyes, a glimmer against the cascade of doubts trying so hard to suffocate her. The coffee shop they agreed to meet in was small and unassuming, tucked away from the hustle of the town square. As Emma approached, she noticed her pulse quickened. Would anyone recognize her? The very act of walking in here felt like a betrayal, a declaration that she was taking a stand. Taking a deep breath, she pushed through the door. Marcus was already seated, his demeanor engaged, eyes scanning the room. As Emma slid into the chair across from him, she felt the gravity of their conversation hanging in the air. "I'm glad you came," he offered, his voice steady, grounding. "Thanks for meeting me," Emma replied, struggling for composure. "I know this is difficult," he said, leaning in slightly. "But understanding the facts is the first step." As they spoke, Emma found herself drawn into a world she had only brushed against. The complex interplay of legal frameworks, community ties, and the unsettling reality of whistleblowers facing dire consequences. Each revelation stoked the fire within her, but it came with the realization of what lay ahead. He furnished her with data that shook her world, gripping her with urgency. With every ounce of knowledge comes responsibility, she reflected. The risks now felt palpable, stretching out before her like an unsolved puzzle. The hour passed quickly, and as Emma prepared to leave, a sense of determination solidified her resolve. Perhaps she wasn't merely destined to remain a passive observer in her town's history. She could strive to reshape it, even at a personal cost. Still, as she stepped out into the busy street, a new message dinged on her phone. The feeling of empowerment began to fade as she recognized the sender. Her heart dropped. Was the warning back for round 2? The anxiety churned violently. The shadows of what might lay ahead unfurled before her once more. The time had come to face what she had feared most. Would she step into this dark twilight, or would she turn back once more, leaving the truth hidden? The path to justice no longer felt like a mere choice. It became an odyssey, binding her fate to the unknown, replete with peril and consequence. Emma's pulse quickened, and her breath hastened as she pondered the weight of that revelation. Stepping away from the threshold of her fears, she clutched her phone tightly. The stakes were higher than she had imagined, and the days ahead would challenge her resolve in ways she couldn't yet foresee. But faced with this new reality, she had found something precious. Her voice. The moment of truth arrived. Would she gather enough courage to confront those who threatened to silence her? The message chimed again, amplifying the knots in Emma's stomach. She braced herself, scanning the screen. A familiar name flickered back at her, like a glitch in her reality. It was her father. Emma could feel the weight of her choices crashing down on her. She hesitated. Her instincts urged her to respond, yet every emotion felt tethered to that small screen. Would he understand the struggle she was in? Would he judge her for the path she now felt compelled to take? The man who had once been her hero, entwined with the very institution she was now questioning. "Mom," her daughter called from the other room. Emma's chest tightened as she put the phone face down, battling an increasingly familiar tug-of-war between personal safety and the urgency the truth demanded. "Are you coming to help me with my homework?" The innocent question pierced through her chaotic mind, grounding her momentarily. "I'll be right there," she called back, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Sitting at the dining table, surrounded by the detritus of her kids' school projects, Emma felt unmoored. She traced the lines of her daughter's latest art piece, a drawing of a family, colors bright and cheerful, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing in her heart. She gathered her thoughts, reminding herself why she was feeling this way, why she was stepping into the storm rather than sheltering her family away from it. Returning to the coffee shop felt inevitable. Knowing Marcus was awaiting her solidified her decision. She had questions, and more importantly, she needed guidance. In those moments shared with him, she could sense a flicker of increased resolve, a spark igniting the dull embers of her conviction. But facing her father loomed over her like a shadow she could not ignore. That evening, under the fading sunlight, she sent a message back to her dad, tapping out carefully constructed words, lined with care, yet emboldened by her new truth. She didn't disclose everything. Instead, she lightly touched on the complexities intertwined with her professional life. She wanted him to understand she was questioning the world, that she wasn't lost, but rather finding herself amidst the chaos. Sending the message felt like casting a stone into still waters. She could only hope it would ripple out and not cause a tidal wave. Meanwhile, her mind began to map out her next steps. If she were to pursue the truth, she needed to equip herself with knowledge and allies, people who understood both the dangers of speaking out and the importance of doing so. Emma barreled into her role as a nurse with newfound zeal, taking the lessons from her encounters with Marcus and approaching her co-workers with an open mind, gauging who might share her concerns. The air of the hospital felt different now. Every interaction held potential. Every corridor harbored whispers of solidarity. She began to gather information unobtrusively, listening more intently to the stories of her patients, of families unjustly affected, small rebellions against the system. As days passed, Emma crafted a plan. She would compile her observations and tales. They would serve as her armor when the time came to challenge the narratives she once accepted blindly. Each patient represented a puzzle piece in the larger picture she was trying to unveil, a picture she was determined to reveal. Unbeknownst to her, tendrils of tension were unfurling in the shadows of the hospital. A manufactured silence often governed these walls, and her awakening to it was beginning to raise alarms. Rumors started swirling, glances exchanged like coded messages. She felt eyes on her as she walked down the hall, as if they sensed the shift in her energy, her growing confidence. Just as she prepared to address her concerns at the next staff meeting, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was a group text from her neighbors discussing a community meeting voiced as simply an inquiry into public safety. The urgency intensified. Her pulse raced, for this was her chance, a threshold into activism that could ripple back into her family, into her work, and possibly unravel everything she had built. Emma paused at the prospect. The implications gnawed at her. Would she be silencing herself with that choice? or finally resonating with the courage she so desperately sought. The connection to her father, the complexities of her chosen battle, everything hung in the balance as she stared at her phone, considering how the truth might forge a new path or shatter the fragile connections she held dear. It was time to move beyond contemplation. Would she summon the courage to embrace the turmoil within her so she could rise as an advocate and not just a nurse? As new messages trickled in, each more loaded than the last, the air felt charged with the promise of both conflict and liberation. The moment to define her truth was drawing near. But would she be ready to brave the unknown ahead? Emma sat on the edge of her bed, fingers trembling over the phone. The silence in her home was palpable. It seemed to amplify her fears. Thoughts whirled in her mind, chasing one another like leaves caught in a storm. The group meeting was the door she needed to push through, yet the prospect ignited a smoldering dread. She could visualize the faces she would confront. Her colleagues, once companions in the ordinary grind, now seemed like potential adversaries. Would they label her as a troublemaker, an outlier, or even worse, would they view her as the one who dared to breach their unwritten code of silence? Her phone buzzed again, a response from her father. A small lump formed in her throat as she hesitated, opening the message. He expressed concern for her well-being, wishing to understand her struggles, pushing gently against the walls she had erected. Emma's heart ached. What if he was right? What if this journey of hers, rooted in questioning the status quo, led to nothing but discord and a distant relationship with her family? "Mom?" Her daughter's voice broke the tension, creating a momentary inversive reality. Emma blinked, scrambling her thoughts. "Can you come help me pick out my outfit for tomorrow?" "Just a minute," she called out, the familiar innocence pulling her back to the present. It was a grounding moment, yet it also screamed of the life she desperately wanted to protect. Would her resolve to seek justice put this small world she cherished at risk? As she stepped into her daughter's room, the sight of bright clothes hanging haphazardly on tiny hooks filled her with warmth. Emma helped pick out a cheerful dress, but inside, a storm raged. Shouldn't her daughter know her mother is brave enough to face uncomfortable truths? Perhaps her daughter could learn from this journey, from the decisions Emma would make in the coming days. Returning to her own room, Emma shut the door and breathed deeply. She needed clarity, a strategy that aligned her professional obligations with her call to action. She settled at her desk, scattered with medical journals and patient files, and began to draft her thoughts. Words spilled onto the page, raw and revealing. The inequities she consistently witnessed weighed heavily on her conscience, patients being denied care due to systemic red tape, families crushed beneath the bureaucracy of the system she had devoted her life to serve. She wouldn't just identify the problems, she would advocate for those who felt powerless against them. Each keystroke twisted the knots in her stomach tighter. The character of her journey was shifting from hesitant nurse to determined advocate. The angle had changed. Her focus was no longer self-preservation. She needed allies, and allies demanded trust. As she penned her observations, she prepared a detailed account of her experiences, fully aware that any request for change would require an unwavering commitment. The following morning, as the sun streamed through her kitchen window, Emma could barely contain the pulsating energy surging within her. She knew attending the community meeting could yield both powerful support and formidable opposition. She donned her crisp uniform, fixing her gaze in the mirror. This was her moment. But with each step, nagging doubts, especially about her father's judgment, whispered in the back of her mind. Could he, the patriarch who upheld the values she now questioned, ever stand upon her side? Emma flicked her phone, nervously scrolling through updates surrounding the meeting, her heart racing at the influx of voices, some emboldening, others dripping with skepticism. As she read, a resolute pulse thrummed in her ears. She was no longer waiting for permission. How could she address injustice if she silenced herself because of familial ties? It was then she decided the truth would no longer be kept at arm's length. As she walked toward the hospital prepared for the meeting, Emma felt every heartbeat drum out her resolve like the steady rhythm of an anthem. But just as she arrived at the hospital entrance, a familiar figure stepped in front of her. Marcus. His eyes brimmed with intensity, an urgent message written across his face. "Emma, we need to talk. There's something you don't know." Her heart skipped, knowing whatever it was could change everything. The rhythm of her pulse quickened, caught between the path she had chosen and the unexpected pressure closing in around her. What truth awaited her in the haze of uncertainty? The surge of anticipation flooded Emma as she faced Marcus. His urgency pulled her from the precipice of her thoughts, demanding her full attention. What could he possibly mean? Was this an invitation to share, or a warning she hadn't anticipated? "Let's step inside," he urged, glancing around as if to gauge the eyes upon them. Emma nodded stiffly, the weight of his statement already planting seeds of dread in her stomach. They entered the hospital's break room, a sanctuary of coffee machines and buzzing fluorescent lights, dark thoughts swirling in her mind like a whirlpool. "What is it?" she pressed, her voice low but laced with determination. Marcus leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You know the meeting today is about addressing some of the inefficiencies the hospital has been hiding, don't you?" "Of course," Emma replied, puzzled. "That's why I'm going. We have to talk about the systemic issues that are affecting patient care." He shook his head, a grave expression etching across his face. "It's deeper than that. There are discussions about accountability, and I overheard some folks mentioning your name, suggesting that anyone who stands up could be targeted." The floor beneath her felt unsteady, the stakes suddenly higher than she'd anticipated. "Targeted?" she echoed, the word heavy on her tongue. "You mean there might be repercussions, Emma? You could lose your position, your colleagues might turn against you. There's a lot at stake, and not everyone is as brave as you think," he explained, his brows knitted with concern. Her heart raced, adrenaline coursing through her veins. The moment of empowerment she had felt just hours ago began to blur under the weight of intimidation. She wasn't naive. She had witnessed how dissent was silenced, how voices bent under the weight of conformity. But to be named specifically, that fear transformed into a stubborn resolve. "I can't turn back now," she stated firmly. But even as she said it, a flicker of doubt ignited deep within. "Just promise me you'll be careful," Marcus implored, his expression vulnerable. "You mean a lot to us, to the patients who depend on you." "Thank you, Marcus, I will. But I need to do this." They stood in a tense silence, the gravity of her decision layering the air like thick fog. Emma's thoughts raced, grappling with newfound realizations. This wasn't merely about speaking out anymore. Her role had become a balancing act between guilt and passion, between family loyalties and professional ethics. As they exited the break room, each step felt like walking over a fault line. The hallway buzzed around them, a juxtaposition of laughter and hurried voices that contrasted with the quiet determination filling Emma's mind. Facing the meeting room, she felt a chill run down her spine. Would the same colleagues who shared laughter in break rooms turn against her? Would they brand her an outcast or, worse, become complicit in a system they all accepted? Emma caught a glimpse of her reflection in the glass doors, and for a moment she barely recognized herself. The bold nurse she aimed to be stared back with a flickering flame of doubt. Could one voice raise a louder cry than the collective silence she had always known? As she entered the meeting room, the harsh fluorescent lights illuminated familiar faces. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. But before she could gather her thoughts, she felt a presence at her side. Marcus stepped in, claiming a seat near her, solidarity evident in his stance. "Whatever happens in here today, just remember why you started this journey," he whispered, and Emma nodded, swallowing fear in exchange for purpose. But as the meeting began to unfold, a voice she never expected cut through the air, a direct challenge to her integrity, a confrontation that would test everything she believed in. "Emma, you really think you can challenge this system? Are you ready to face the consequences?" The room fell silent, eyes turning toward her, the question hanging like a guillotine. This was the moment she had feared, and yet in the pulse of adrenaline she felt a whisper of hope. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the fight ahead. Would she rise to the occasion or crumble under the weight of her past? In that charged moment, Emma knew her response would define who she was going to become. But just as she prepared to speak, a startling realization struck her. With every word, she could uncover something about herself she had buried all along. How would she choose to confront the truth in this pivotal moment? The silence in the room was deafening, a collective breath held in anticipation of Emma's response. Uncertainty swirled around her like a storm, lined with apprehension and fragmentary hopes. She felt the weight of her colleagues' gazes bearing down on her, the challenge laid bare like an unspoken ultimatum. But within that pressure, something sparked, a deep-seated resolve that began to drown out the cacophony of doubt. "Am I ready?" she echoed, her voice unexpectedly steady, though the tremor in her hands remained stark. "I've spent years witnessing what happens when we turn a blind eye. I watched as patients suffered while those in power preferred to ignore their cries. So yes, I think I'm ready to face the consequences." The words escaped her, a cathartic release, and Emma could feel the energy in the room shift. Some faces softened, eyes widening as if a veil had been lifted. Others remained skeptical, arms crossed defiantly, prepared to defend the status quo. "I refuse to let fear govern my decisions any longer," she continued, emboldened by her own conviction. "If we don't speak up now, how can we expect change? Today isn't just about efficiency. It's about accountability and the human lives affected by our inaction. We owe it to our patients to demand more for their sake and our own." A murmur rippled through her colleagues. Half embraced her sentiment, while the other half recoiled, suspecting rebellion. As tension thickened in the air, a man at the end of the table, someone she'd considered an ally, stood up abruptly. "Emma, do you even understand the risks? This isn't a game, it's our jobs. You're talking about actions that could take down not just you, but many of us who have lived in this system." His voice rose, a crescendo of panic that ignited others to nod in agreement. Emma's heart raced at the realization that her stand, her overdue voice, was becoming an edifice of division among her colleagues. The fear of her potential isolation clawed at her confidence, but it also fueled her determination. She scanned the room, a mosaic of expressions, some fearful, some intrigued, and some dismissive. "I do understand the risks," she replied, grounding her voice. "That's why it's even more important to act. We owe it to those who depend on us, the patients, the families who trust us. If this system fails them, then it fails us all. I can't stay silent any longer." The room exploded in discord, arguments sparking like wildfires, with voices rising in disbelief or agreement. She saturated in the chaos, maximizing each heartbeat that resounded within her. With each challenge she faced, Emma dug deeper into her conviction, claiming the power she had almost relinquished. It was within that turbulent dialogue that she spotted Marcus. He wore an expression that oscillated between pride and concern, an unshakable anchor amidst the storm. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment, an unspoken pact of solidarity exchanged in silence. And then a turn, a voice that, though hesitant, emerged from the corner of the table. I think Emma might have a point." It was Janet, a junior nurse, typically quiet and agreeable. "If we don't stand up for what we believe in, who will? The patients deserve better." Emma felt a rush of adrenaline as one voice joined hers, igniting a flicker of hope in the room. Perhaps this wasn't a solitary battle after all. The spark ignited, stretching from Janet and transforming into a flicker of camaraderie among the fold of nurses in the room, who began to express their own grievances, frustrations, and dreams for a better system. As they groped for shared experiences and truths, an undeniable anticipation surged within her, blending exhilaration with nervousness. Could this energy shift momentum in her favor? Just as she contemplated how to lead this newfound collective spirit, another interjection cut through the noise, stark and uncompromising. And what if we get punished? What if we lose everything we've worked for? Emma's gaze shifted towards the speaker. It was Mark, a long-time veteran of the hospital, his voice laced with genuine fear, one that resonated all too familiar within her. "Sometimes," she said, silencing the room with her intensity, "standing up means risking everything. But isn't that what being a nurse truly is? A commitment to care, no matter the cost." With her heart pounding in her chest, Emma prepared to fight for every promise she had made to herself, every commitment she'd made to her profession. She had awakened something profound, not just within herself, but possibly in those around her. In that crucible-like moment, Emma found a choice before her, not just to reclaim her own agency, but to inspire a tide of voices that collaborated with her for change. Yet the opposition loomed large. Would the empowered spirit she sensed in the room be enough to shift the current, or would the entrenched system snuff out her and her colleagues' newfound courage before it had a chance to flourish? As the conversation intensified, Emma felt the pressure mount. This was not simply about her integrity anymore, it was about the very essence of what it meant to be a healer amidst chaos. Now, more than ever, the question remained. Could she ignite a revolution of care, or would she watch in frustration as her peers retreated into silence? The stakes were raised, but so was her resolve. Emma took a breath, the air thick with fears and aspirations intermingled. The unmistakable journey of transformation had begun. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could form the words, the door swung open, and in walked someone no one expected to see. Someone who could potentially be the proverbial ace in the hole, or the final nail in her coffin. What would they bring to the unfolding chaos? A tall figure entered the room, commanding attention, with a presence that felt both authoritative and unsettling. Dr. Hargrove, the hospital's chief of medicine, surveyed the scene with an expression that blended confusion and disbelief. The clamor subsided as the doctors and nurses instinctively adapted to the gravity of his arrival. "What's going on here?" His voice was smooth, but the undercurrent of irritation threaded through was unmistakable. Emma felt a twist in her stomach. He was no friend to the dissenting voices. He had built his career on maintaining the status quo, and she feared he was armed with the power to silence her before she could rally support. "Dr. Hargrove," she began, her determination surging against the anxiety squeezing her chest, "we're discussing our responsibilities as caregivers and the need to advocate for our patients. We believe it's time to address some significant issues within our system." "What I believe," he interrupted, narrowing his eyes, "is that you're wandering into dangerous territory." He took a step closer, his gaze fiery and direct. "Don't mistake idealism for practicality. You risk careers and lives with this kind of zeal." Emma struggled to breathe, trapped between the weight of his warning and the fervor pulsing in her veins. This man had built an empire on dismissing voices like hers. She knew the stakes were higher now than they had ever been. Yet all she could envision were the patients who deserved more than mere compliance. "Doctor, this isn't just about us," she pressed on, each word gaining strength. "This is about the patients suffering from preventable harm, about our duty to advocate for them above all else." Dr. Hargrove scoffed, a smirk creeping onto his face. "This duty you talk about is a noble concept, but it's not a luxury we can afford." The reality is simpler: toe the line or face the consequences. Every ounce of courage Emma had gathered began to dissipate as the reality of potential ramifications loomed heavy on her shoulders. She felt the heat of the room swelter. Collective breaths held once more in the tension-filled air, and she sensed her colleagues beginning to retreat, uncertainty leeching their courage. But as her mind raced with self-doubt, something shifted within her. The frustration that had simmered beneath the surface erupted, a fierce surge of conviction ignited by the very fear that sought to cripple her. "Perhaps," Emma shot back, her voice steady and unwavering, "the line we need to toe is the one that separates whether we are nurses or mere automatons. We must choose to act in the interest of every single person who relies on our care." Gasps echoed through the room, admiration flashing across the eyes of some, while others braced for the inevitable fallout. Emma found herself emboldened further by the responses around her, the faint hum of solidarity blossoming even as Dr. Hargrove's expression twisted in disdain. "You think your audacity is going to inspire change?" he challenged, folding his arms. "It's naive, and you'll find yourself in a very lonely place soon enough." "Lonely, maybe," Emma shot back, a smirk of her own creeping up through the fear. "But not alone." The words rolled off her tongue like a mantra, asserting a commitment not only for herself, but for every voice that had been silenced. Still, the moment hung precariously, and she knew she needed to lean into this tension. Emma was aware that she'd crossed an invisible threshold. She had taken a stand she knew could come with dire consequences. Yet she had discovered a hidden strength, a willingness to risk everything for what she believed in. Just then, she caught Janet's eye. The junior nurse stood resolute, a spark of rebellion dancing in her gaze. "I'm with Emma," Janet declared, her voice breaking through the silence. "It's time we spoke up for what's right." One by one, others began to murmur their agreements, the collective courage mounting in the room. Emma felt a swell of hope, yet a stark reality loomed. The hospital system was not going to back down easily, and neither would Dr. Hargrove. As tension thickened in the air, Emma steadied herself for the possibility of a fierce battle. The journey ahead wouldn't just be about the truth they sought, but how they managed to navigate the storms that would inevitably follow. What Emma didn't realize was that in challenging Dr. Hargrove, she was also stepping into a game of chess that would stretch beyond mere professional conflict. For the first time, the stakes felt more personal than professional, intertwining her career and deepest values. And as the line between ambition and fear blurred, Emma sensed that true change was always born from this type of uncomfortable tension. A new resolve settled over her as she prepared to strategize her next steps, but whispers in her gut warned her the conflict was only beginning. If she truly hoped to ignite a revolution of care amidst chaos, she would need to confront not only the resistance of her peers, but also her deepest fears about what she might lose in the process. As Dr. Hargrove's eyes pierced her with a challenge hanging in the air, a thought took root. It was no longer merely about advocating for better care. It was about redefining herself in the face of conflict. Would she possess the fortitude to withstand the coming storm, or would the system crush her resolve before she could fully rise? The battle lines had been drawn, and Emma knew the time had come to face not just her colleagues, but the formidable system entrenched in silence. The room felt alive with an electric tension as Emma faced the reality of her bold declaration. Colleagues began to shift uneasily, some glancing at Dr. Hargrove with apprehension. The air thickened with uncertainty as the chief of medicine exchanged silent glances with a few high-ranking staff, who seemed to share his skepticism regarding any challenge to the hospital's established protocols. But Emma had ignited something. She could feel it brewing, and it began settling deep within her, transforming nervous adrenaline into fierce resolve. As she stepped back, the weight of her words lingered, sharp and potent. What struck her most was the echo of her own voice, defiant against the monotony of compliance. For the first time, Emma began to envision a community not just constrained by protocols, but animated by devotion to their patients. The shift was tentative yet substantial, a whisper of the changes that could coalesce into a chorus of coherence. Later that evening, after the meeting had dissolved into silence, Emma took a moment to reflect, wandering the empty corridors of the hospital. Lights glared down from above, like spotlights illuminating the stark reality of her situation. She was no longer just a nurse. She was a catalyst for change. Each step echoed her internal turmoil, a blend of fear, hope, and growing determination. Emma's thoughts pinged between the urgency to act and the repercussions of standing firm against the likes of Dr. Hargrove. What did it mean for her career? How would she navigate the inevitable fallout? But as she pushed further into the recesses of her mind, she realized that what really terrified her was not the potential fallout, but the prospect of returning to complacency. Determined to sharpen her approach, Emma began drafting the issues that had bubbled to the surface during their earlier discussions. The proposal would need to be concise yet powerful, replete with data and testimonies that showcased what was at stake. Actual lives, real suffering. To fight Dr. Hargrove, she needed an arsenal, facts, figures, and perhaps most importantly, the courage to unite her colleagues behind her. She made a mental note to speak with Janet and the others the next morning, knowing that building a coalition would help solidify their voices and amplify their call for change. Emma sensed she was on the precipice of something extraordinary. The passion she felt was palpable, rooted deeply in her professional identity. This was more than a professional upheaval for her, it was a reckoning. With an invigorated clarity, Emma crafted a vision within her mind. She could start small, with team meetings to foster open dialogues. Perhaps a weekly forum where nurses could express their concerns, whatever hurdles they faced, and brainstorm solutions that wouldn't just serve the system, but enhance patient care. The idea bubbled to the forefront of her consciousness, igniting her commitment further. But just as hope unfurled like a spring flower, a nagging fear clutched at her throat. What if she couldn't mobilize them? What if the fear of retribution was too powerful? The risk was real, and she had seen too many colleagues bow out from fierce conversations with jeopardized futures. Yet the thought of staying silent, of watching her patients be stifled by bureaucracy, solidified her resolve. Would a whisper of dissent not be louder than a scream of compliance? Emma knew she needed to be ready for the backlash, to devise counter-strategies for what lay ahead. Sitting at her desk, late into the night, she pored over data, feeling her pulse quicken with each alarming statistic she uncovered about patient neglect. The shadows of doubt lingered, but the brightness of purpose guided her through the labyrinth of her fears. As dawn broke, she felt the weight of the day ahead settling on her shoulders. Today would mark the line of departure, where the way things had always been stopped meeting the needs of those they served. Gathering her notes, she prepared herself for the conversation that would shape everything to come. In that moment, she resolved that she would not merely react to Dr. Hargrove's threats. She would devise a strategy that could reframe the narrative entirely. The mountain she faced was perilous, yet invisible threads of camaraderie unfolded with each thought of her colleagues standing beside her, emboldened and unwavering. Emma took a deep breath, the anxious knot in her stomach transforming into steely determination. It was time to act. And as she stepped towards the meeting room, an unexpected realization dawned on her, kindling an even fiercer ambition. She wasn't just fighting for change, she was beginning a crusade to redefine healthcare within her grasp. With the stakes impossibly high, she would confront Hargrove head-on, but the real test lay in the support she believed she could rally. What she hadn't anticipated was that the brewing storm of conflict would challenge her not just in the hospital, but in the very essence of who she was as a nurse and a person. The imminent confrontation loomed larger than she could imagine, setting the stage for a transformative battle that would reverberate in ways she could never conceive. Emma was ready to face the challenge, but was she prepared for the consequences? Emma stood in front of the meeting room door, heart racing and palms slick against her notes. The sterile smell of disinfectant mixed with the sharp odor of floor wax filled her lungs, grounding her just long enough to suppress the rising tide of dread. She had rehearsed her points repeatedly, envisioning each dialogue, each rebuttal, but as her hand lingered hesitantly on the doorknob, self-doubt threatened to undermine her resolve. Resolutely, she pushed the door open. The room was filled with her peers, faces ranging from curious to wary, their expressions a mirror of her internal conflict. Emma took a steadying breath, forcing herself to remember why she was there, to ignite change, to advocate for their patience and, unexpectedly, for her own voice. Upon entering, she was met with a hush, the murmurs and rustle of papers quieting as they turned toward her. This was her moment to command attention, yet the weight of their expectations pressed heavily on her shoulders. She had envisioned a powerful introduction, a call to arms, but as she faced her colleagues, she felt exposed, vulnerable beneath their collective gaze. "Thank you all for coming," she started, her voice firmer than she felt. "I know that we face many challenges in our professional environment, but it's time we address them head-on." A couple of nods met her statement, but anxiety wove through her determination. What if they were not ready to engage? What if they were too afraid of retribution to stand alongside her? Glancing around the room, she spotted Janet, her ally, and motioned for support. Janet's encouraging smile gave Emma just the boost she needed. They took turns discussing the points Emma had outlined in her proposal. Shortages in staff, patient ratios that breached ethical standards, the bureaucratic iron grip choking the kind of care they were trained to provide. With each statistic shared, each personal testimony allowed to surface, Emma noticed the tension in the room shift. Voices grew gradually louder, fueled by the collective frustration that had become all too familiar. Yet in the middle of her rising momentum, the door swung open with a jarring clatter, and Dr. Hargrove stepped in, a storm cloud casting its shadow. His presence snapped the atmosphere taut. The mood in the room turned electric. All semblance of camaraderie seemed to falter as he offered a chilly sweep of his gaze. Emma's heart thudded wildly, but she held her ground, pushing back against the instinct to retreat under his scrutiny. "Is there a problem here?" he inquired, his tone dripping with condescension. "No problem, just a critical discussion about our practices," Emma responded, adrenaline spiking. This was the moment of truth. She would not cower under his authority. Dr. Hargrove's eyes narrowed, a predator assessing its prey. "I hope you understand that not all suggestions are worth exploring, especially those that could undermine hospital protocol." Yet Emma felt emboldened by the collective weight of her peers behind her. "With all due respect, Doctor, our first obligation is to our patients. We need to re-evaluate our practices in light of the evidence and the experiences of those on the front lines." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma's heart raced as she waited for the fallout from her defiance. Could she withstand Hargrove's dismissal? Would any of her colleagues back her up, or would they recede into the safety of silence and compliance? The internal struggle she had feared began to materialize, not just within her but throughout the room. Just as she braced for the worst, Janet spoke, her voice unwavering. "Emma is right. We can no longer ignore the toll this takes on our patients and on us." Empowered by Janet's support, the room transformed. Quickly others began to speak up. Testimonies of missed calls, ignored concerns, harried assignments poured out like a dam breaking. Every voice added depth to Emma's resolve, her own fears forgotten in the swell of shared purpose. As the energy shifted, Emma realized she was stepping into a potential light of something greater, a movement that could reshape their working conditions and redefine their individual roles as caregivers. Yet her instincts remained sharp. Not only was she battling a powerful established figure, but she was also grappling with something much larger. The confrontation was beginning to outweigh her plans, and in all the excitement, the ramifications of her actions hung in the air, unspoken but palpable. As the session grew chaotic with passionate exchanges, Emma's mind danced ahead. This could spark a change, but at what cost to herself and those she cared for? The spark she ignited was more than a flicker. It begged to escalate, but she found herself at the edge of a deep chasm. Would this bold step bring forth the metamorphosis she envisioned, or would it pull her and her colleagues to a precipice of conflict they might not survive? The stakes were climbing, and with each passing moment the uncertain future loomed larger, daunting and deeply compelling. Emma stood, caught between the fervor of possibility and the ominous weight of consequence. The needle of change had been threaded. Now it was time to face the inevitable repercussions that awaited. Emma stood in front of her colleagues, the air still charged with the remnants of the storm they had unleashed. Emotions surged, weaving through each nurse and doctor present, mingling frustrations and the dawning hope of collective action. They had stepped beyond mere discussion. They stood on the verge of a shift that could redefine care in their institution. As her words hung heavy in the atmosphere, Emma noticed the initial shock in her peers was morphing into a sense of solidarity. Each voice that joined hers felt like a victory. Yet the reality of Dr. Hargrove's disapproval loomed ominously overhead. She knew she had ignited a fire, but would it burn bright enough to withstand the winds of opposition? "Thank you for sharing your insights," Dr. Hargrove interrupted, his composure regained, but no less dismissive. "But let's not mistake passion for practicality. You're risking your careers with this reckless behavior, thinking that your voices can thrive in the echo chamber of pushback." "Reckless?" Emma countered, her heart pounding. "This isn't about recklessness. It's about responsibility. How many patients have we forsaken by not scrutinizing the very systems meant to safeguard them?" Suddenly, as if a dam had broken, more voices began to emerge from the group. They recounted stories of patients slipping through the cracks, of nights spent worrying about how to provide adequate care under the current pressures. Emma felt the camaraderie reaching critical mass as more colleagues began to vocalize their frustrations instead of cowering in fear. The room buzzed with newfound energy, a chorus of urgency, battling the oppressive weight of the institutional silence they had lived under for too long. Emma realized with each testimony, with each raised fist of agreement, they were not just making a case, they were forging a movement. But somewhere in the back of her mind, the specter of consequences lingered. As they spoke passionately about the need for change, she could feel the looming shadow of Dr. Hargrove, whose reputation for retribution was well known. The prospect of isolating herself from long-time colleagues haunted her, yet she reminded herself of the very patients they fought for. Just as hope began to swell, Dr. Hargrove leaned forward, eyes narrowing, and addressed Emma with cold clarity. "You know this could lead to your dismissal, don't you? I could make sure you regret speaking up." Instead of crumbling, Emma felt an unexpected pulse of defiance. "If that's the price for advocating for the very people I was meant to care for, then I refuse to turn back. I'd rather fight for justice and risk everything than remain silent and watch lives unravel." At that moment, she fully embraced her transformation. The woman who had once stood on the sidelines, bound by fear and doubt, was now rising as an undeniable force, challenging the status quo. She had not only recognized the dissonance of her earlier complacency, but had also found her voice fully anchored in purpose. Hargrove's harsh demeanor faltered, revealing a flicker of uncertainty, perhaps even concern about losing the power he wielded. The tide in the room had shifted irreversibly, the boldness of Emma's convictions unveiling a troubling truth. The nurses around her were no longer mere employees. They had become allies in pursuit of a vision for systemic change. She could see Janet, a nurse with whom she had shared innumerable quiet moments in the break room, now stepping forward boldly. "Dr. Hargrove," Janet said, her voice steady, "we are committed to ensuring that care comes above all else. With all due respect, if we're not willing to confront our failings, we're jeopardizing everything we stand for." As murmurs of agreement rippled through the room again, Emma felt a wave of pride wash over her. She had transformed. This was not merely about her anymore. It was about everyone who had felt marginalized under a suffocating culture. They were ready to push back against intimidation and reclaim their identities as healers. In the following days, Emma emerged as a leader within the walls of the hospital. She began organizing meetings with her allies, creating a structured approach to address the core issues plaguing their unit. Each interaction fueled her confidence. Every story recounted strengthened their resolve. Then came the acknowledgement. The hospital administration, recognizing the swelling tide of discontent, was compelled to respond. They arranged an open forum where voices could be shared without the constraints of fear. Emma's heart raced. It was a tangible manifestation of their labor, their transparency. On the day of the forum, she approached the microphone again, but this time the nervous pulse was replaced by unshakable conviction. As she articulated her mission and their collective insights, she felt a sense of belonging and purpose wash over her. The hospital administration listened intently, and as she concluded her remarks, a wave of applause broke behind her, echoing throughout the auditorium. This was no longer just her fight. It was the fight of every person who dared to seek justice for their patients, a stand that resonated far beyond her individual platform. A few weeks later, she was met with an envelope bearing the hospital's crest. Her stomach fluttered, knowing the stakes had remained high, but the recognition she'd received felt undeniably deserved. As she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. She was nominated for a prestigious nursing award, not just for her advocacy, but for restoring the core values of care that had been neglected. Emma Carson had not merely survived the turbulence, but had emerged as a champion of truth and integrity. A nurse transformed by her willingness to confront fear with relentless courage. At that moment, her heart brimmed with deep-seated pride, not for personal accolades, but for the collective spirit of her colleagues ready to stand for change. Through dedication to herself, her patients, and her colleagues, she had dismantled the shadows of complacency. In doing so, she not only salvaged her identity, but revitalized the essence of their shared profession. Her journey of transformation wasn't just complete. It was the awakening of a purpose that would guide others long after. This was merely the beginning. Inspired, empowered, and emboldened, Emma knew it was time for others to take up the mantle and continue this crusade. So now, as she stood amidst the applause, she felt a deep calling to let this be a spark, an urgent invitation for all to open their voices in pursuit of undeniable justice. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Seriously, it makes a difference. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to subscribe now. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share. Only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions.